Hello, everyone. Ron Gerber from Angelbeat, another one of my fireside chats. This time, I'm so excited to have Kyle, who's the CTO of IBM Z. You may have associated IBM with mainframes, at least when I was growing up many years ago. The term IBM Z encompasses not just mainframes, but a whole suite of other solutions, software products, hardware solutions, etc. And as so many people are looking at their technology plans for the future, and as mainframes, and I'm putting that in quotes, and mainframe legacy apps in a more general sense, are continuing to be such a critical, important part of so many organizations' current computing infrastructure, I thought it'd be very useful to hear from IBM and Kyle, their CTO, on what is going on in the world of IBM Z. What are some of the challenges and opportunities that organizations should be aware of as you're looking to continually modernize all their applications, from the most simplistic sales automation tool to the most sophisticated mainframe IBM solution, and give us some perspective on some of their plans for next year. Maybe to start it off, Kyle, you could describe a little bit about the IBM Z organization, all the different components that are a part of it.
Yeah, certainly, Ron. And first, I'll say thanks very much for having me. I'm excited to be here on one of your.
I'm excited to have you too.
So yeah, I think historically, when folks think about IBM Z, right, or historically mainframe, right, they largely think of the hardware, and that's fair, right? I mean, IBM is make no mistake, is definitely a leader in hardware technology, and specifically for the mainframe and our power series as well. But I'll say that it's obviously a lot more than hardware, right? There's a tremendous software suite that goes along with that hardware, and that's the area of my focus. So to be clear, I'm the CTO of IBM Z software. The IBM Z is much broader broader certainly than Z software. But I'll say, in addition to just kind of the software and the hardware stack that we have, there's also, the Linux One offering, right, which is on the 390X architecture, right? Linux One, Linux on Z, right? Those are really about that enterprise scale Linux for our clients, and many are taking advantage of that, most certainly, because it comes with all the security, reliability of the Z platform, but now you have the availability of Linux, right, to work and operate with. And that's become a very foundational part, certainly, to our OpenShift strategy as well, right? When you look at OpenShift running on our Linux One, Linux on Z stack. So mainframe is a lot of things, so certainly more than just the hardware aspect.
But one of the key things, given the nature of mainframe applications behind some of the major banking systems, ATMs, I mean, when you think about the top mission critical applications, in probably 9 out of 10 or 99 out of 100 or some ridiculous percentage like that, they're pretty much powered by mainframes. And I think one of the things that people may not realize, and maybe you could expand upon this a little bit, is that you really need to integrate the software and the hardware in mainframe strategies to ensure you get the optimal performance, security, et cetera.
That's absolutely the case. We recently, at the Angelbeat webinar that we had a few weeks ago, that you were kind enough to allow IBM to be guest participants at. One of the things that we wanted what we discussed was about the fact that, as we're entering, and entering is the wrong word, as we've really matured in the world of hybrid, right, hybrid cloud, right. Initially, I would say, and I think most people would agree, that initially public cloud was the destination, and everything else was just the journey along the way to the destination of public, right? And so, I think that's evolved a lot. I think as customers worldwide are looking at, okay, I have such a rich ecosystem of assets on IBM Z, right? And other platforms, certainly x86 is not immune to this, migration to public cloud, data centers in general, right? Taking a hard look at strategically, what's the best way to get the most value out of my business? I think a lot of customers are realizing and have realized that, hybrid is in and of itself a destination, right? I have so much rich application and solution sets here that I don't need to actually take them all the way to public cloud, right? Having the ability to seamlessly integrate multiple, platforms, right, with each other, right, is really a foundational element of what we're doing with hybrid. And for IBM Z's perspective, what we've had to do and really focus on is enabling that experience, right? We couldn't come forward and be successful here if we offer the same experience with Z that you would have had 20 years ago or 10 years ago, right? We've had to evolve as the rest of the market. I think that's largely what we've been able to do. There's much more of a roadmap to come, but we've done a lot to really enable Z to be a first-class participant in a hybrid topology, which I think is really important for our customers that have had this investment, wanting to know what can I do with this? How can I leverage this investment in today's world? And that's what we're really enabling our clients to do worldwide.
So I would think the critical thing, again, we're talking in November 2021. I'm sure lots of CEOs and CFOs are looking, they recognize the importance of the Z family of mainframe software, et cetera. And as they look at their future plans, they hear about all these great advantages of going to the public cloud. I think one of the unique capabilities or services that IBM continues to offer is what's your best strategy in terms of IBM is very aware. You've got the IBM Cloud Group that works closely with you in terms of helping organizations decide what is best suited to the hybrid architecture. And just as importantly, what are some of the issues or unintended consequences when you've got this running so well, it's really not suited for the public cloud. And I think that's what you're alluding to. Once you get a little bit beyond the hype, there are lots of compelling reasons, financial, strategic, and otherwise, regulatory, why you really can't move certain applications to the cloud.
And that's true. And let's face it, right? What one of the values of hybrid is that you now have the opportunity to really place workload on that best fit platform, right? And if you look 30, 40 years ago, right, there wasn't the plethora of options for hosting that there were today. So there are absolute instances where there are applications deployed on Z that probably are best suited somewhere else, right? But back when the decision was made, there were no really other options to actually bring to the table as far as a strategy. And so we recognize that, and we're in favor of that. We can't support hybrid and say, nope, everything that's on Z has to be on Z in perpetuity. Hybrid's for everything else, right? No. We have to accept, and we do accept, that there are workloads that should actually likely migrate off of Z. Similarly, though, there are applications and workloads that should probably migrate to Z, right? For the reasons that exist today. And I'll tell you some examples, just to be broad brush. I mean, largely like when we talk about this, the systems of engagement, like the digital front doors for consumers, right? That really makes a lot of sense to be in a public cloud, right? Or maybe just not. Those applications don't necessarily need to be hosted on Z, right? They don't have those characteristics and properties that are really required for certain types of workloads, right? You can look at like wealth management, you look at insurance, you look at largely systems of record, you can look at retail, right? A lot of those areas, banking certainly brought up, the regulatory needs, the compliance needs, the data needs, the actual SLAs that they have in place, like that data and that information, those business assets on Z are critically important to the success of those organizations. Now, that doesn't mean that a system of engagement isn't important. That's how you interact with your consumers, right? If that fails, the whole thing falls apart. It doesn't matter how strong and secure your back end is or reliable it is. If you don't have the right digital front door, you're in big trouble. That said, though, just the properties of public cloud, as one example, are very well suited to that style of application, right? And so even systems of integration at times can make a lot of sense to run in a public cloud, right? Or just in a non-Z environment. But the ability to actually have those things work together at scale, right, is what becomes very, very important. And scale has always been something Z has had. Reliability is something Z has always had, right, since its inception, really. But now we've introduced a couple of other things that help with this world of today, which is really kind of the pricing model now with Z, right? We've introduced tailored fit pricing, which allows the pricing to scale up and down, just like it's basically consumption-based pricing model now for Z, which is a very big deal, right? Historically, clients had run at 80 to 90% capacity due to the pricing model on Z, which is still a valid pricing model, but when you look at how do I tolerate massive spikes in workload, right? If you're running at 90+% capacity, it's really hard on the Z side to have capacity on demand, right? So tailored fit pricing really flips that around and says, hey, you know what? You're going to get that capacity on demand. You're going to get that elastic scalability in terms of pricing, right? So that you can have capacity on demand for those spikes, and then you can lower it down as you hit the valleys, right? And so I think that's one of the newest things that we've done as far as just really aligning more with what's happening in the market, and consumption-based pricing is a big one, most certainly.
This is clearly not the IBM when I grew up of wingtip shoes and white button-down shirts. That is clear. And what's also interesting as I listen to you, you get this impression that Z and mainframes, it's not an area of growth, but I think as you correctly pointed out, especially with this approach of IBM of embracing the cloud, there could be situations, and I believe that there are, maybe you could explain on this, where an organization wasn't looking to mainframes and now is saying, okay, and there's another data point, I'll use data as a pun intended here, you know, as people talk about the amount of data being generated every year could be equal to the amount of data generated in the last century. I mean, it's some orders of magnitude like that. So some of these organizations are confronted with so much data that they want to analyze in real time, be it web traffic or things like that that are ideally suited mainframes. I would imagine that there are scenarios where you're engaged in these discussions that suddenly organizations are thinking, I can get Z capabilities, consumption pricing. I didn't think about, you know, IBM for this application, but now you're very cloud oriented, you're very hybrid architecture friendly. I probably should look at Z as a solution as I'm planning 2022 that maybe I didn't consider in the past.
And that's true. And I'll tell you, I think what Z has done really well the last 4 or 5 years, and this is not to say that Z didn't do it well beyond that, but really a really intense focus is on the developer themselves, right? So we've put a lot of focus in Z on really kind of helping the developer ecosystem, right, work better with Z, right, developer productivity. And what I mean by that specifically is, you know, if you look at the historic developer, and when I say historic, I mean there's clients, the developers of today, right, that still are using very proprietary mechanisms and techniques for interacting and developing software and applications for the Z platform, right? Very, very proprietary, right? And we needed to really work on that at scale, right, across the Z estate. And so we had to then say, okay, for example, what are the top IDEs in the market today? Okay, VS Code certainly is a very, very big one. Eclipse remains a big, you know, IDE that developers use. Eclipse Shea, right? Look at Red Hat Code Ready Workspaces. These things are all now coming on as very, very like kind of all-inclusive IDEs for developers. So we then took the approach of saying, okay, we're going to integrate with those, right? So we're going to bring together COBOL, PL1, Assembler, right, into that same IDE experience, so that as a developer that's doing full stack development, right, they don't have to context switch, right? Oh, if I'm doing the Java or Node part of the application, I'm using this IDE. Oh, if I have to do something on the Z side, I got to jump over to this other IDE that's really only meant for Z-based programming languages, right? We've completely, you know, overhauled that entire approach. So now a single developer, right, whether it's brand new or somebody with 30 years of experience, can now use the most modern IDEs on the market today, right? And frankly, what I didn't say earlier when I talked about, you know, what's the Z of today, it's so much more than, from a languages perspective, COBOL, PL1, Assembler, right? Java, Node, Go, right? Python, all of these coming and available.
By the way, is it also applicable to Fortran? That's another language that I remember in my youth.
Yeah, there's not as much Fortran out there on Z, but it exists.
Okay, fine.
But the biggest point is, like, we have to have developers go through the same developer motions, right? If I'm going to start a debug session and I'm going to just go through and step into and step out of, track variables, set breakpoints, right? I need to do that identically using the same actual controls in the IDE, regardless of implementation language, regardless. And so now, whether you're COBOL or Java or somewhere in between, right, it's the same, right? How I interact with my repo, like GitLab, right? It's all the same. And obviously the automation underpins all of that, right? You look at the magic and beauty of cloud, right? Cloud wouldn't exist without the intense automation that underpins everything we're doing in cloud. We've done that, and we're doing that now on Z platform as well. So we can integrate in a common enterprise DevOps pipeline. We can use Ansible now to automate the heck out of anything you want to automate on the Z platform, right? I mean, and these things are critical to attracting the developers, right? If they have to squint and look sideways when they're going to develop an application for Z, they're just not going to do it. There's too many other options out there that are too easy, right? And we had to have Z be just as easy, just as effective, just as simple. And so we've taken great strides in those areas, and there's much more to come. You look at, like, self-service, right? How do we project all the services and software running on ZOS so developers are empowered to just stand them up just like they do any other service running in any other cloud platform, right? We already have solutions today on Z for that, and there's much more to come to do the whole lifecycle management around applications from basically OpenShift, right? Which is what you would imagine is our top strategic entry into the space.
And I'm trying to reflect on some of the comments you made earlier about the Linux solution within IBM Z. You combine that with now the IBM Red Hat combination going into its second or third year, I forget when. I'm sure that presents a very strategic opportunity because all the Red Hat community of developers may not have been oriented around mainframes and the Z platform several years ago. And now, even as Red Hat remains an independent entity working with all organizations, the fact that they're more closely and strategic aligned with the IBM Z business unit as a sister company presents probably a wealth of opportunities for Z to reach those developers. And as I said, committed to open source, that's obviously the core strategy of Red Hat. And now you've got a great opportunity to have so many of these developers not just look at other solutions, but say, hey, okay, I've worked with Red Hat for 10 years. Now they're part of IBM. Okay, great. And now I get more of a window to see how my familiarity with Red Hat can easily extend over to IBM Z. And now I'm thinking, maybe I should start looking at this IBM solution that I probably wouldn't have considered even a year or two ago. I got to believe that's one of the key strategic rationales is to tighten that Linux OpenShift open source relationship, at the very least within your business unit.
Oh, that's absolutely true, right? We've done so much on the Linux on Z, Linux One front with OpenShift to make sure that is as tight as an integration as possible, and it is, right? And we have customers that really, really love that because they love the whole notion of the enterprise Linux running on really that standard, tried and true mainframe architecture, right? Which is really, really, the most secure system on the planet, the most reliable system on the planet, the most performant system on the planet, right? You get all those three things in combination with OpenShift, right? It's really a match made in heaven. And we're also extending that, though, to ZOS, right? So when I say IBM Z, right, that's kind of a broad encompassing, it's got the Linux part, it's got the ZOS part. With OpenShift, certainly now with ZOS, right, we're really allowing OpenShift to manage to ZOS and really double down on some of that developer productivity I mentioned earlier. So now you can go to, the OpenShift catalog, right, or through the CLI, and you can see ZOS software as services, right? So as a developer, I can say, you know what, I want an IMS runtime and I want a DB2 database, right? Or I want a CICS runtime, a CICS app server, right? An IMS application server with an IMS database as the back end. And those things will just get stood up on behalf of the developer through all the automation that we're doing around ZOS, right? Largely with Ansible now. And those things are just helping the developers be so much more productive, right? So take an application that's 25 years old, right? That can now be, a developer now can go log into their OpenShift environment, right? Have access to the team that's working on that application, provision the environment for them, right? And have the pipeline with their application already there, apps already in Git, right? And they can go through, operate on the application in VS Code or code ready workspaces, what have you, and just drive the pipeline all the way through for build, test, deploy. It's no different, right? And certainly the implementation language is a little different, right? It might be Java, but it's still largely a COBOL platform, PO1 platform, right? But the motions are the same. And so before, the implementation language sort of dictated what kind of tools developers could use, right? And it kind of put them in a little bit of a box, right? Now the language no longer dictates the tools at a developer's disposal, right? We are ensuring that they can use any tool, any solution out there in market today that they're comfortable with using, that they learned in college, and just Now it's just the language I'm going to use, but everything is tied together.
So it's got to be pretty exciting if you combine a couple of things, and I really appreciate your time. You've got on one hand this new strategy within IBM. I don't say it's new, but a reinforced strategy of embracing the hybrid cloud when appropriate for even historical applications. And I think that's very profound. And then when you, as I said, now several years into the Red Hat acquisition, that was in parallel path, but the previous strategy within the mainframe Z business unit of embracing open source only gets accelerated with the Red Hat combination. And you've got this embrace of the hybrid cloud, this embrace of open source and Red Hat. And I suppose there's a third element, which is this focus not so much internally in your products, but making it very easy to focus on how developers work, not how Z works. And there may be different sides of the same coin, but when you've got that approach, suddenly you would think the future looks pretty bright for IBM. And this concept that the mainframe's going away, right, is that I bet someone at IBM may joke like this is the 10th anniversary of the year that the mainframe is going to go away, or something like that, where they keep saying it, and yet it keeps growing because IBM is continually innovating. There are compelling business cases that drive it, as alluded to before, with the amount of data growing exponentially. I mean, it's right, mind-boggling. You do need the power of big iron, so to speak, to help people understand that, but you want to deploy big iron in a very forward-thinking way, which is hybrid cloud-oriented, open source-oriented, and developer-centric. Yeah, well, good.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, good. Well, I appreciate that. I'm just, I'm like a person who goes to Holiday Inn Express. I'm pretty smart at summarizing things, and I'm glad we could do that. So we'll look forward to having you, Kyle, present at some future Angelbeat programs. If people have questions as you're going through this, you might be listening to in 2021. Similar issues will evolve in 2022. You can always contact me at Angelbeat, #Angelbeat. We'll be glad to put you in touch with Kyle and his team of experts. The key thing is, you don't want to necessarily assume that your Z system, your Z platform is simply antiquated. I think it's actually the opposite. It's incredibly modernized. It's incredibly cloud friendly and open source oriented. So I think it behooves everyone to make sure you speak with IBM, not just the other traditional public cloud providers who may offer alternative approaches, so all of you can make an informed decisions. And my own personal bias is that you really need to speak to the people who have been in the mainframe Z world for 50, 60 years, because there's a lot of legacy knowledge, and you don't necessarily have to be, you don't say have to worry about how do I find a COBOL programmer in 10 years, because there's going to be lots of solutions, as they mentioned, what IBM's doing behind the scenes, so the developers don't worry about studying COBOL programming per se. IBM's going to make it so they can do what they're doing same as always and making it very developer friendly. So I think that's another key takeaway.
Absolutely.
All right, well, great. Well, Kyle, I look forward to the Golden State Warriors. You can see his basketball in the background, maybe meeting one of my New York sports teams in the NBA Finals next year. And Kyle's in the Bay Area, so even though the Giants didn't win the World Series this year, despite I think winning 107 games, if I'm not mistaken.
They were pretty amazing. Just edged the Dodgers out. But then the Dodgers didn't make it either.
Didn't make it either. So we'll look forward to seeing you maybe at some championship game, but I appreciate your time, and I look forward to having you share new insights to the Angelbeat community in the near future.
Right on. Thanks for having me, Ron. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye now.